Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the GSD. I'm Diane Davis. I'm the chair of the Department of Urban Planning and Design, and I'm here to welcome you to tonight's celebration, which honors this year's recipient of the Veronica Rudge Green Prize, or maybe the most recent. This is a prize that's given every couple years. I think the award has a year of 2017, but by the time we got the exhibition and got our acts together here, we're in 2018. The Green Prize is the only international design prize of prominence that considers not only the aspirations of a design proposition, but also the real impact that a given design has post-implementation. The GSD has been giving this prize since 1986, when it was established to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the school with an endowment from Michael Van Clem, who was a member of the school's visiting committee at the time. And according to documents describing the purpose of the prize, it was to be given to a project that was larger than a single building, or to a landscape project that made a positive contribution to the public realm, that would help improve the quality of life of that circumstance and offer a humane and worthwhile direction that might be followed by projects of a similar ilk. And that's a quote. Quote unquote, the entire list there. Further specifications made clear the importance of having a social orientation associated with the award. And finally, the award was intended for a project and not merely the designers per se. That's not my word merely, that's a quote also. I emphasize all this wording and the prize's specifications because although those words date back several years, they all speak to the spirit of the deliberations that inspired our committee, the Green Prize Committee, to select this year's recipient to be the Highline. Stated simply, this project was chosen not just because of its exceptional design, but also because it was a cooperatively orchestrated, multifaceted endeavor in which citizens, top-tier professionals, and public authorities work together to innovate and successfully implement a new archetype for urban design, one that is now being replicated globally. As a design intervention, the Highline is equal parts infrastructure, landscape, and architecture, built around an impassioned commitment to post-industrial retrofitting, urban revitalization, the recuperation of public space, and the allure of the natural environment. All these elements came together through the collaborative work of some of the leading architects, landscape architects, and urban designers of our times, including those in James Field Corner Operations, Diller Scofidio Renfro, and Piet Oudolf, among others. And we are thrilled to have most of those luminaries here with us this evening. Not just James Corner and Lisa Swift, but also Liz Diller and Rick Scofidio Switzer, and all of whom we'll be hearing from shortly. But our jury chose a Highline as the recipient of this prize because it also is a project of cultural advocacy and citizen design insurgency, set in motion in 1999 by Robert Hammond, Joshua David, and a wide range of resident advocates who together formed the Friends of the Highline, and who were collectively motivated by a desire to activate new public spaces so as to enhance the overall quality of life for the neighborhood. And Robert and Joshua are here as well with us, and they and several others will be joining for a panel discussion tomorrow at noon to discuss a little more in a focused way how the citizen-led initiatives help produce one of the most iconic urban design projects of our times. So let me say something about the committee and the process of deliberation before I turn the podium over to both our principal speakers as well as Stephen Gray. In a minute, we'll be talking about the exhibition, which kind of reflects the logic of our committee. I just want to say that this was a wonderful committee to work with, and I thank Mohsen Mostafavi for appointing me as chair of this committee and for working with me to pull together a wide-ranging group of leading designers and professionals in their own right, most here at the GSD, but not all. They include Charles Waldheim, Paula Vigano, Jeanette Coe, and Stephen Gray. And you will be hearing from them later as well. I want to thank them for their dedication, insights, and willingness to engage with the inevitable disagreements and tough questions that arose in the process of narrowing down a short list of close to 30 projects to a semifinal list of 10, and ultimately to a short list of 3. And by the way, I also want to thank Caroline Smith, who at the time was an Irving Innovation Fellow here at the GSD, for her critical involvement, and who was directly involved in the curation of the exhibit with Stephen. Caroline is now a doctoral student here. Together, as a committee, we visited the 3 final shortlisted projects, and in the process engaged in ongoing debate and deconstruction of the pros and cons of each project, often over lively and robust dinner conversations that we later wished we'd recorded. Much of our thinking was guided by questions about the future of urban design as a profession, about the shifting disciplinary boundaries between landscape architecture and urban design, about the role of anticipated and unanticipated consequences in assessing the value of a single project, and the question of why certain regions of the world were not well represented among the nominated projects in our shortlists. They tend to be dominated by European and fortunately American as well. That also factored into some of our discussions because some of the most recent, the last 4 or 5 recent Green Prize winners were countries in the global south or in Europe. At the end of these conversations, we usually ended up with lofty plans to produce an edited volume, or maybe it was inspired by the wine at the dinners, an edited volume or a conference that would enable us to dig more deeply into the biases in the design professions, while also documenting the newest trends, contradictions, and opportunities facing the field of urban design. It was really great fun. And the rigorous back and forth over the course of about 8 months led us on a path to collectively select the Highline as the project, finally, in the long run. Among our top 3, it was the best project, the one that generated most heated discussion and that we all felt really good about agreeing on at the end. Now, why the Highline? When we first shared our decision about the Highline with several of our colleagues before going public, many responded by asking why we at Harvard were going to give our coveted Green Prize to a project that already has received so much recognition. And indeed, we discussed this among ourselves within the committee. After all, starting in 2001, the Highline won the annual Village Award, followed 2 years later by the William H. White Award. Then in 2000, several years down the road, an Engineering Excellence Award in 2009, and then collected a string of architectural awards from 2010 to 2017 that brought the total number close to 28, and I think that's counting because I think they're still getting awards. Now, somebody could see this track record as supporting our collective recognition of the importance and value of the project. Others might see it as a wasted opportunity to call attention, for Harvard, to call attention to yet another unknown but important project. But in our deliberations, we were able to square this tension by highlighting several aspects of the Highline that may not have received the recognition of those prior awards and the recognition that we think they deserve. In other words, moving beyond the design and thinking about other aspects of the award, which make it special in our collective eyes. And that involves calling out, again, the particular role the Friends of the Highline played in the larger success of the project. Not only did we want to recognize the fact that the Friends were the first movers in a process that turned a visionary idea into a reality, we also want to recognize their guiding involvement as central to the creative exchange and commitment among all the various design teams, as well as the public and private sector partners of the project during multiple years of collective work. The Highline would not have been built without unyielding citizen advocacy or institutional engagement with a variety of city agencies. Nor would it have captured the attention of cities worldwide without the ingenious and masterful accomplishments of a team of architects, landscape architects, and urban designers, all of whom worked together to give the Highline its absolutely extraordinary qualities as a public space. The rare alignment of actors, each reaching distinction at the highest professional level, makes the Highline both remarkable and worthy of this prize, embodying the best in the field of urban design while also contributing to the collective realm. And I think we're going to hear more about that from our presentations in a few minutes, and we'll actually see and feel that kind of sensibility when we're out in the lobby seeing the exhibition. So what happens now is I'm going to call on Stephen to talk a little bit about the logic of the exhibition, after which we will have 3 sets of presentations, starting first with Robert and David from the Friends of the Highline. Then we'll turn to Lisa and James, the field from the landscape side, and we'll end with Liz and Rick. And then we'll have time for a few comments from other members of the jury. And ultimately, we'll get out there and feel and see the Highline through the exhibition. But right now, let me turn it over to Stephen.
Thanks, Diane. The 13th Veronica Rudge Green Prize in Urban Design recognizes the Highline as exemplar for the complex coordination of creative professionals, philanthropists, and policymakers by 2 deeply committed community advocates. The Green Prize also recognizes Friends of the Highline for their unwavering commitment to improving the public realm through design excellence and their capacity to continually reinvent the Highline in ways that support more inclusive public spaces, both in New York and across the globe. The opening of the Highline in 2009 was neither the park's first nor final achievement. Originally conceived in the early 20th century, the elevated rail was a response to public outcry over rail-related fatalities at street level. Over time, the Highline became increasingly peripheral to New Yorkers, if they noticed it at all, seen more as a decaying behemoth, a platform for vice, and a hindrance to progress, than for its potential as a transformative public asset. Nearly 10 years after the first section opened, the Highline's reemergence as a beloved and celebrated public space not only has transformed a neighborhood, it has also influenced how we approach and understand urban design on a global scale. The evolving nature of cities situates the practice of urban design situates the practice of urban design within much longer trajectories of urbanization that can be fully expressed or understood in a singular site, agent, or process. The Highline exists simultaneously as material, infrastructural, and object-based, and immaterial, agency-driven, and process-oriented. Its influence extends far beyond the physical, temporal, and geographic space it occupies. Projects like the Highline can come into being only through an expanded practice of design, one that interweaves politics, policy, and public process into design of the built environment. This exhibition explores these intersections of activism and infrastructure, unpacking the social, natural, and formal design components that make the Highline an exceptional urban design project. With a deep appreciation for infrastructure, and through an unlikely feat of activism, Joshua David and Robert Hammond, founders of Friends of the Highline, embarked on a journey to save a decaying urban artifact. Initially armed with site visits and images like this one from Joel Sternfeld's photo essay, Friends of the Highline worked with James Corner Field Operations and Diller Scofidio Renfro to reimagine a decommissioned rail as the exceptional and beloved public space that it is today. So through this process of designing this exhibition, I just, of course, again, want to thank our Dean, Mohsen Mostafavi, Ken Stewart, Pat Roberts, Paige Johnston, as well as the prize selection committee, Diane Davis, our chair, Jeanette Kuo, Paula Vigano, Charles Waldheim, and Caroline Felice Smith, who was our diligent scribe who eventually became my co-curator of this exhibition, as well as the exhibition collaborators from Friends of the Highline, Adam Ganzer and Anna Hippie, from James Corner Field Operations, Lisa Switkin and Margaret Jankowski, and then from DSNR, Matthew Johnson and Trevor Lamphere. I'd also like to thank my co-conspirators in the design of this. Again, Caroline Felice Smith, Dan Borelli, head of exhibitions, David Zimmerman Stewart, Maria Paisana. But I especially want to thank Forrest Jesse, who we couldn't have done this without. So thank you, Forrest. Slicing through New York City's West Chelsea neighborhood, the Highline hides and then reveals itself again within a structured grid, moving stealthily past and through buildings and billboards. This exhibition invites visitors to move in equally close proximity to thematic billboards, presenting familiar images on the front and then offering peeks behind the industrial scaffolding to reveal the more complicated backstories. Inspired by the ecological microclimates and planting scheme, a series of experiential rooms presents perspectives of the Highline as both object and process, infrastructure and activism, moving visitors beyond their general assumptions, expectations, and preconceptions to a deeper understanding of the project's more obscure complexities. When you enter the gallery from Quincy Street, which is the front and center near the library, you're greeted with a billboard, this billboard, that shows Robert and Joshua in their early days standing on the derelict rail. This image embodies the conceptual framing and organizational logic of the exhibition. The microclimates on the right side of the gallery, towards this Piper Auditorium, examine the Highline as infrastructure, while those on the left side examine it and focus on its aspects of activism. The microclimates are not sequential, they are thematic. They're intended to present balanced assessments of topics and issues related to each theme. So on the infrastructure side, Lifeline of New York introduces another civic group active nearly a century ago that is responsible for the Highline's existence. Building the Highlines explores the challenges of a project that did not fit within the purview of the Department of Buildings, Department of Transportation, or Parks Department standards. The High Life highlights the positive and negative effects of development which have been unevenly distributed. Plants, Planks, and People presents the Highline as a platform for an infinitely wide variety of programs and uses. Material Palette shows the richness that can be achieved by adapting a flexible system of components to enhance an existing railway. Missed Connections looks at the proliferation of the Highline name for Highline-branded luxury perfume, pizza shops, and illegal drugs, as well as film, television, comic books, and literary fiction. Competition Culture illustrates the Friends of the Highline's dedication to both an inclusive public process and to design excellence. On the activism side, Dissonance reminds us that the support for the Highline did not come quickly or easily, least of all, and ironically, from the real estate development community. 24 Hours on the Highline takes a look at the past 40 years, juxtaposing the present-day character of surrounding neighborhoods with the people, industries, and subcultures that previously made the neighborhood what it was. Value Capture examines how the Highline was negotiated, financed, and operated in an age of neoliberalism when public resources for parks are relatively scarce. High Society shows the expanding role of contemporary art in public space, and the Highline Network celebrates a peer-to-peer community of infrastructure reuse projects that spans the country and soon the globe. The story of the Highline includes issues of importance to every discipline at the GSD, demonstrating the breadth of urban design as a discipline, one that is both synthetic and distinct. The story of the Highline is complicated, with lessons of activism, real estate development, and design, or perhaps more critically stated, lessons in the realities of neoliberalism, gentrification, and the production of elite space. When confronted with these critiques, Friends of the Highline have been both self-aware and responsive. Soon after opening, they recognized that less than a quarter of the visitors who were New York residents were also people of color. They quickly instituted a robust public programs agenda, capitalizing on the Highline's success to engage a broader range of publics and invite New York City residents that didn't otherwise see the Highline as a place for them. This programming now accounts for nearly 1/3 of the $14 million annual operating budget, and has increased representation by people of color to nearly half for all New York residents. Reflecting on the Highline's social, environmental, and economic successes and shortcomings, and with a genuine aim to find ways to create more equitable public spaces, Friends of the Highline more recently established the Highline Network, a peer-to-peer community of infrastructure reuse projects that spans the country and the globe. And while contexts and resources vary widely among cities and projects, Friends of the Highline operate with a belief that every project team has something to share with and learn from each other. It is this capacity to reflect, be self-critical, and to constantly reinvent and expand their mission that sets Friends of the Highline apart. This exhibition explores their journey, unpacking the nuances therein, and framing the discipline of urban design as both product and process, infrastructure and activism, and a constantly evolving socially, politically, economically, ecologically, and spatially synthetic work in progress. Thanks.
As I said, we'll start with Robert. Joshua.
Right. Good evening. I'm Joshua David. I want to begin by thanking the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, especially Diane Davis, Stephen Gray, the prize selection committee, and the team that made the exhibition and this evening so beautiful. The exhibition is really, truly amazing. It's to walk through it is an incredible experience, really. I can't wait to spend some more time out there. I also want to thank Robert's and my esteemed collaborators, James Corner, Lisa Switkin, Liz Diller, Rick Scofidio, and John Alschuler, who've joined us tonight. These 5 represent so many others who've collectively made the Highline what it is. When we talk about the Highline, it's tempting to highlight nuggets of wisdom about architecture, landscape design, preservation, and urban planning. But at its core, to me, the Highline's success is a human story, and the lessons I take from it are human ones, about vision, passion, commitment, determination, and ultimately collaboration. It starts with just 2 people, Robert and me. Nearly 20 years ago, a pair of New Yorkers who live in adjoining neighborhoods, travel in similar circles, but have never met. After each discovering the Highline and falling in love with it, we found out it was going to be torn down by Mayor Giuliani's administration, and ended up sitting next to each other at a community board meeting where that demolition was being discussed. It's hard to fathom today, but that night we were the only people in the room who saw a future for the Highline. Everyone else was there to say why the hulking, out-of-use freight rail viaduct should indeed be torn down. But Robert and I began talking, and somewhat naively decided to give saving the Highline a shot. How could we not? 1.5 miles, 7 acres, connecting 3 Manhattan neighborhoods, allowing you to move through the city at the inside of city blocks, 30 feet in the air. To look at it was to dream. What would it be like to experience New York from up there? In coming months and years, many others joined our quest, and with each who joined, we gained more power to beat the long odds. Phil Ahrens, our first board chair, who gave Friends of the Highline its name and defined our core values. Karen Lowe, our first volunteer, who put flyers on light poles and manned our booth at street fairs. Joel Sternfeld, who gave us the spectacular photographs that showed the potential of the site in breathtaking visual terms. John Alschuler, who defined the economic argument that won over Mayor Bloomberg. Gifford Miller, who threw every bit of his political weight as city council speaker behind the Highline. Amanda Burden, who championed a rezoning that put the Highline at its core, and who demanded a design process that looked at the site in individual human experiential terms. and, of course, the brilliant team of James Corner Field Operations, Diller Scofidio and Renfro, and Piet Oudolf, who have shared an astonishing 14-year-long collaboration, creating a public environment that has inspired their peers around the world. And there are thousands more, who each brought a piece of themselves to the project. The Highline represents a human collaboration on a truly monumental scale. When I walk on the Highline today, I feel them all and hear their voices. And this is in a landscape that is supported by scores of gardeners, maintenance workers, public programmers, educators, art curators, and volunteers, all funded by a generous board and group of donors that is the envy of every park conservancy in the world. In 2015, after 16 years with the Highline, I went on to run a global cultural heritage organization where I had to select sites in which to invest financial and intellectual resources to ensure their survival and to make them drivers for positive social change. In doing so, I found that there are infinite places of value, meaning, and potential in this world, all with great needs. For each where you choose to invest, there will be 1,000 others where you cannot. So how to choose? What I found, time and time again, when faced with this infinite need and opportunity, was the sites that create the most meaningful impacts are those with strong, innovative groups behind them, groups that in some way represent Friends of the Highline, made up of people from a range of backgrounds and disciplines, working across lines of government, community, art, academia, and social justice, with a passion that verges on religious devotion. Investing in these groups, in these people, is one of the surest ways to ensure success. There are funders who, at the start and at various points along the way, invested not in the physical plant of the Highline, but in Friends of the Highline and its capacity to grow and thrive. It is these backers who enabled us to become the powerful, created, devoted group that we are today, one that not only saved, designed, and built the Highline, but one that raises millions of dollars annually to steward a park with some 7 million visitors each year, in perpetuity, with virtually no current government support. To its staff, board, donors, and volunteers, being part of the Highline is not just being part of a 501c3 organization. It is a culture and a belief system shaped by a collection of voices arguing person by person for design excellence or equity and social justice or cutting-edge cultural programming or horticultural experimentation or commitment to community or for retaining a part of the Highline's old, transgressive gay identity when club kids and leather queens went to raves or to cruise on the Highline in a city that was a lot less polished than it is today. In the words of the Highline's great friend, Amanda Burden, public spaces always need vigilant champions, not only to claim them at the outset, for public use, but to design them for the people that use them, and then to maintain them to ensure that they are for everyone, that they are not violated, invaded, abandoned, or ignored. There are many stories to tell about the Highline, and this is one that I hope that we will always remember. With that, I'll give you Robert.
So I want to follow up on that theme of people. When Josh and I wrote a book after the first section opened, and when we were writing it together, we were going back on all the sort of the strategies and stories. And almost every time we realized all the things that made us successful were not our ideas. They were other people's ideas. And I've come to realize that I think our best talent, or one of the best, was really recognizing smart people, getting them on board, and then being able to execute their ideas. And I want to follow, I'm so glad you thanked all of y'all who are here. I also want to thank, the Bloomberg administration was just an incredible, this is really a great example of a public-private partnership. And very few other administrations, and I hope if there are future politicians here, y'all will, take a flyer on a crazy idea, because this could have easily failed too. It's turned out to be successful, but it could have easily. And on people, Steve, Steve and I want to thank you for this exhibition. It blew me away. I mean, no offense to MoMA, they did an exhibition on the Highline. This is much better. This, I think, will be the best thing that's ever done on the Highline. And I know there are a lot of others involved in that, but I just, it's sometimes it's hard to take in sort of what the Highline has become, and when you see something like this, it's just really powerful. So I want to talk about the other F word, failure, and don't worry, some of my staff were here, they hate it whenever I say that word. But I obviously think the Highline is a huge success. But I think when I use that word, it's one of the reasons I think we've also been successful is we were always worried about failing. And always thinking about what we could do to make it better. And in the beginning, my fear of failure was not that we wouldn't get it built, I really didn't think it would happen, but I thought if it did happen, we would ruin it. Because it was so magical up there. That landscape, without Josh and I in it, is magical. And, how could we recreate that? And we got, at one of our community input sessions, we got this card that says, the Highline is an amazing idea. It should remain untouched. No doubt you will ruin it, so it goes. And that card, and it's reprinted out there. It's still on my desk. It's very faded now. Because I thought we would ruin it. How could we recreate that? And when we did the competition, it was really when we first heard the design team and they were arguing amongst themselves and started arguing with us. This is at the interview, that I realized that we had something. And what they did is we had to remove everything that was there. So you couldn't, and so some people had an idea of just putting all new architecture basically on top of it, sort of no nature. Other people was sort of a slavish recreation of exactly what was there, but it was a Disney version a little bit. And so what they did is they created something completely new and brought a new magic that was inspired by that original magic. But then I also thought, I think we shared, even when I was walking on it before it opened, I was like, oh, is this that good? Is this, I remember obsessing about the paint in Chelsea Market. It was a crappy color, and it was, Amanda Burton agreed. She was like, this is going to ruin it, this color in Chelsea Market. And it wasn't until opening day that I realized it worked, and it was seeing the people in the park is what made it success. It was the design, but it was the design with the people that really made it work. And sort of flash forward to today, when Josh mentioned we'll have 7 million visitors. We thought we'd have 300,000 visitors a year. That's what the Guggenheim or the Whitney had at the time, and now we're having 7 million. Put that in perspective. That's a little more than what the Met gets and 1 million less than the Louvre gets, except both of them are over 40 times our size. And then the economic success, the early study John did, I think said it was going to create about $260 million in value for the city. I just updated it. It's going to create over $2 billion. That's just in new tax revenues. It's tens of billions of new development. But this brings these new challenges. The New York of 1999 is going to be very different of the New York next year, which will be 20 years in 2019. And one of the things that we're grappling with, and one of the reasons I think it's such an interesting time for the Highline, is how do we help? We've created incredible economic, social, cultural, and economic benefits, but it's not necessarily shared by everyone. And so we also realize that we as a parks group are not going to solve housing problems, income inequality, the education issues. But I think it is important that public space interacts with all of those issues. So what is our role that is helping create all of this value in trying to deal with these issues that are coming up? And one of the things we don't have the answers. We definitely don't know. That's one of the reasons we created the network, is not to teach, and the name is sort of a misnomer because I think we're not trying to tell people to do it how we did it. It's how do we learn from each other, and how do people learn from the things that maybe we could have done differently, or that now other people can do, since we've sort of had this proof of concept. And we also do a lot on the economic front. a big thing for us is how do you, there are all of these new jobs, but the people in the neighborhood aren't necessarily benefiting from it. It sounds easy to connect people with businesses. It's not. And that's something that we're really working on. And then in art and culture, how do you, one, make sure it's all free and accessible to everyone, but what stories are you telling, and who is getting to tell those stories? And so one of the projects, they have a picture of every single art project that we've done on the Highline, which is, I think, is 300 of them. But the one I'm most excited about, and they already have a picture of it here, is we're going to inaugurate next year when we open the last part of the Highline at the Spur. It's a Simone Lee sculpture called Brick House. And to me, it's this sort of alternative narrative to sort of what I think people will see in Hudson Yards. So I'm really excited about that. And then I want to end with the Milan Opera. And I'm sure Liz and Rick hopefully will talk more about it. But this was an idea, that they came up with. And the artistic part was amazing. And I don't really like music, so I couldn't judge if the music was good. But to me, it wasn't, and I think the art was good, but what really made it was that there were over 1,000 singers from every borough. Most of them were all volunteers from 38 community choirs. And it really, you felt the power of the diversity of New York that makes New York great. And I think that's where our future, really lies. And that's why I feel like, in some ways, we've come so far, but I feel like that the other half of the potential is still ahead of us. So it was really meaningful to be acknowledged by the jury for that work, even though it's, very imperfect. So thank you.
Thank you. Lisa and I are terrified now. We have to try to follow you two. You're a hard act to follow. You always have been. But this prize is really for you. A very sincere thank you to Diane Davis, to the Veronica Rudge Green Prize Committee, to Stephen Gray for a fabulous exhibition. It really is. It's very special. To the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, to Dean Mostafavi, and all others involved in this endeavor. A special thank you to Robert and Josh, the inimitable catalysts and leaders for this entire venture. And also thanks to our design team, my team back in New York at Field Ops, to Liz and Rick and the team at DSR, to the fabulous Piet Oudolf, to Hervé Descottes, to Paul Lesher at Pentagram, and to all of the various engineering and technical teams. The Highline, as everyone's already spoken to, is an extraordinary phenomenon. There's so much you could say about all of its various dimensions. The amazing grassroots community initiatives first taken by Robert and Josh, the adaptive reuse and retooling of a piece of derelict industrial infrastructure, preservation through innovation, the incredible economic development story, transforming an entire neighborhood, related issues between economic development, gentrification, social equity, and diversity, the creative social programming and outreach run by the Friends of the Highline, continued community engagement, the arts and culture program, which is truly extraordinary, urban ecology and horticulture, themes to do with visitation, tourism, locality, something I like to call scenographic cosmopolitanism, or the spectacle of just public life and just so many human beings strolling in the city, the exhibitionist, the voyeur, and the anonymous. These and other topics are what make the Highline phenomena the spectacular intrigue that it is. It's why when we put the book together with Liz and Rick and others, that there's so much in that book, as if it's a full story. But in the couple of minutes that we have this evening, I just want to focus a little light upon the design, upon the physical makeup of the Highline, from its physical conception to its specific materiality, its orchestration, its constructed form, its measure, and its detail. The paving, the railings, the lighting, the stairways, the overlooks, the furnishings, the plantings, the signage, and so on. These are all precisely designed in a coordinated and sequential manner to dramatize the linear experience of movement, to coordinate how views unfold and vistas yield surprise, and to provide that uncanny sense of just how strange and magical this elevated walk and garden is in the context of the west side of Manhattan. We were asked to reflect on the beginning. And the very first design impulse was to keep the linear path-like journey of the Highline as it cut through the city, to retain the wild sense of a robust, green, emergent nature taking over the structure, growing through the concrete, steel, and stone, and self-diversifying and self-growing over time. And this image on the screen shows the very first conceptual montage of the overlay of a new 21st century paving system, systematic and meandering, overlaid on the original railbed landscape, with the grasses and the other plants forcing their way through cracks and openings in time. And this image then becomes the conceptual DNA for the entire length of the Highline, with designed variations on a theme as in a musical score. Believe it or not, 14 years later, we're still designing smaller segments of still unopened sections of the Highline, but this same idea persists. A kind of overlay of organic, growing, wild, dynamic, pulsing nature in the form of myriad grasses, bulbs, perennials, shrubs and trees, along with the insect and bird life these habitats support, integrated with the inorganic post-industrial artifacts and the material residua of the original Highline, commingled with the everydayness of people simply strolling, interacting, engaging, discovering, and enjoying a cosmopolitan promenade of delights. Now, from this beginning grew an extraordinary range of diverse places along the journey, highly specific designed settings for action. We call them social scenes. These are the stages, the platforms, overlooks, perches, windows, get-downs, nooks, and frames. So at the beginning, we were looking for a unifying strand, a thread that tied together a sequential journey of experiences. And then there's also the second overlay of specific settings along the way, places that concentrate and amplify a particular situation, dramatizing a particular moment, and completely reorienting the visitor to the context of the city. These are places that arouse human intrigue, curiosity, and delight. And importantly, these are places that do not exclude or feel in any way privileged. They are instead open and inviting to all people. And it is precisely this melting pot of human adjacency that allows the Highline to be open, democratic, diversely inclusive, edifying, surprising, and completely unscripted. So design continues to be fundamental to the Highline, to its very identity, its aura, its charm, and appeal derives in large measure from the physicality of these settings. If at the beginning the design was motivated perhaps more by the poetics of the Highline itself, the found conditions and the found adjacencies, this is then balanced with a focus upon social engagement, a humanizing form of placemaking where people can be exposed to others, unself-consciously absorbing the essential humanity that connects us all, especially in the context of an ever-evolving city. This journey has been shared from the very beginning with my close and valued colleague, Lisa Switkin, who has seen almost every designed detail on the Highline through from conception to execution. And I would like to invite her to say a few remarks of her own at this juncture. Lisa.
So I got two images too. At the very beginning of the project, we asked a simple question, and that question was, what will grow here? And that question was an initial prompt for us, and it's still relevant today. Nearly 15 years ago, we speculated that programs, habitats, atmospheres, microclimates, nocturnal life, economies, and communities would grow on the Highline. And growth was used as a broad, optimistic metaphor that spoke to germination, to incubation, to development, but also to adaptation, to emergence, and to evolution. Our approach was to build off of what was already there, to grow something new out of something old, to transform something simple and singular, a freight line, into something complex and varied, an ecosystem and a community. We were inspired by both the industrial structure and its history as a working freight line, as well as the tenacity and the beauty of the unusual self-sown landscape that was abandoned for years. Our first walks and impressions and observations were about a sense of magic and opportunism, a truly forgotten space, an illicitness and a rare opportunity to see the backside and the underbelly of the city, a discovery, a secret garden, a careful reading of microclimates that define spaces due to their proximities and exposures, whether they were sheltered, open, in light or shadow, wet or dry, and a new perspective, a new tempo and pace, and a new exchange with the city. All of this informed the design, our position between total preservation and total transformation and the delicate balance that had to be made between those, the development of the keep it simple, keep it wild, keep it quiet, keep it slow mantra, when the notion of keep it actually was not a given. An attention to texture, to richness, to the found and the potential for the new, the power of an unusual and otherworldly garden in the sky, a place to share the life cycle of plants, to transition from grassland to woodland, working with Piet Oudolf to showcase horticulture, the hardiness, adaptability, diversity, and seasonal variation mixed with people in the life of the city. The invention of a new surface that blended paving, planting, seeding, and the industrial character of the Highline itself. And in the end, the creation of an immersive experience, episodic journey, and a dialogue with the city. And this original concept of what will grow here was an idea about change over time. We envisioned the Highline as an ecosystem, a place for people to interact with each other and with their environment. And the life of the project today is indeed an ecosystem. And it's an ecosystem in ways that we anticipated and in ways that we never could have imagined. The social life of the Highline today has brought back the spirit and the art of promenading with a sense of unscripted behavior and informality that allows people to appropriate it and make it their own, with a casualness that's similar to how they would use their own backyard if they had one, which they don't in New York. Yet, the juxtaposition with the city and with other people, with the surrounding residences, historic buildings, new institutions, continue to make it magical and surreal, the same qualities that we experienced on our first walks, but in a radically new context today. For me, the most rewarding aspect of the Highline today is how it has inspired others to look deeply at what they have, to grow something new out of something old with an entrepreneurial spirit, to innovate, to invent, to take risks, and to continue to evolve.
Sorry, Lisa, for messing up your last name there. No problem. Okay, my spell check. I'm like, now we'll have Liz and Rick, please.
Okay, I'm good. Oh, yes. It's kind of amazing seeing all the images. And in a way, I kind of avoided them. And I really wanted to remember kind of the first experiences that I had when I first saw the Highline and what the Highline began to elicit. I think that we all began to respond to. Is that? No, I have to push a button. Okay. There we go. One of the things that you see when you look at the Joel Sternfeld photographs is an industrial artifact that has been kind of run over with plants to the point where If it's left alone, the greenery would eventually have destroyed the structure. The plants grow in cracks through the broken concrete, eroding the steel, and would, in some futuristic science fiction novel, destroy the city. The landscape created a touch of melancholy tension, enforcing the realization that the green was not cultivated garden plants, but plants that came from self-seeded landscape that grew on the out-of-use and elevated rails during the 25 years after the trains had stopped running. We walked on an abandoned rail line full of wild grasses and plants, the kind that people usually weed out of their gardens. And if we eliminated that landscape, the plants would grow over everything once again. Those amazing Joel Sternfeld photographs were very accommodating to a green bucolic rail line that disappeared along with the summer. In that landscape, we discovered pockets of pause where the pace would change, where we'd slow down, and where the aggressive linearity of the rail track dissolved. We observed locations that visually opened out to the city that could be used to provide for a moment of slowness or stillness. We noticed that the plants we found grew at opportunistic locations that led us to think about the Highline the same way as the plants. So like the plants, we discovered opportunities to create special architectural inventions. A critical moment would occur where the train rails crossed 10th Avenue. We could cut into the structure to create a pause, a slope seating area, where the public could sit and watch the traffic ascending the avenue. How you change from the fast pace of the city to a slower pace of the High Line at Gansevoort, the beginning entry point to the elevated rail. We created a long, extended stair that was designed to slow the public down before entering, and to celebrate the structure with close-up views of all the rivets and laminated steel. Through the process, I realized that my aim was to save the High Line from architecture. The heavy steel construction of the rail structure could easily accept architectural additions and other weighty interventions. But walking those bare bones made me realize how wonderful those bones were. The delicate microenvironment required a rethinking of the conventional delineation between the passage of greenscape and hardscape. Changing the rules of engagement between the plant life and the pedestrians would create a strategy of combining organic and building materials into a blend of changing proportions to accommodate the wild, the cultivated, the intimate, and the hypersocial. In stark contrast to the speed of Hudson River Park, the parallel linear experience would be marked by a slowness, distraction, and otherworldliness to preserve the strange character of the High Line. The project turned an industrial conveyance into a post-industrial instrument of leisure, and has become a reflection about the very categories of nature and culture in our time. And now I can relax and let Liv take over.
Okay.
Just a note, as those inserts occur exactly at the same place that the revised new Highline image takes place.
Okay, wow. This is like bringing the band together. It's so weird. And especially because the work isn't over, as James said, like, you know, it's like when you do a linear thing, you can just do it in bits and pieces, kind of like sausage, you know, you just cut a little bit off and then you go on to the next one. So there's still work to do, and it feels very, very present. Thank you, everyone. And let's see, what do I do here? I just put it on. I'm just going to keep it here. So thank you, Diane, and thank you to the jury. It's all that more meaningful because this honor comes from peers. And I have to, you know, when I see Robert and Josh, and John, I don't know where he is, but they're, you know, I mean, these are the guys, the heroes of the project that championed it, pioneered it, imagined it. You know, we were like the beneficiaries to get to do it. And, you know, it wasn't really obvious when we started what we were doing, really. And I love the way that Robert tells the story, that we were fighting amongst ourselves, and that was what was endearing, I guess, because we didn't know. Nobody really understood what we were going to do exactly, but that we shared some kind of link, some kind of a connection about not destroying it, not screwing it up, you know. And I think that we continue to think about how to keep it. There's something very important to preserve, and at the same time not be too nostalgic. And also Piet, who did, you know, a really brilliant job. It was really a minor miracle. But I have to say that the thing that, looking back on the Highline, the thing that is so sort of powerful for me is the unplanned. It's what we found when we stepped foot on the Highline, this industrial ruin, and this was 15 years ago, to its unexpected success, to its influence globally, and to its many unintended consequences. And one of which was this catalytic action it had on the growth of the west side of Manhattan. And you know, a certain part of me says, you know, we're beneficiaries of this great growth because we got to do the shed, which will, you know, just a little plug open in spring. But we're also kind of victims of this because our rent is going to go skyrocketing, and then we're going to have to move out of our studio. But anyway, you know, thinking about this in a broad way and coming back to thinking about it with a group of people that are interested in urbanism and architecture, one has to think about cities like organic tissue. It goes through certain life cycles. It goes through birth, growth, decline, death, rebirth, and it keeps going. And you step into this cycle someplace along the way. You can either help make it go faster, you know, die faster, or live faster, or grow faster. And the thing about catalysts, architectural catalysts, is that you can't exactly, like in science, you can't prove that the catalyst, or you can't predict exactly how its effects are going to be. And so this is, you know, one of the sort of incredible unintended things, is you heard some of the stats about the 7 million visitors last year and all the billions in revenue and investment. And so we witnessed this piece of obsolete urban infrastructure that we found in a sea of open parking lots transform into one of New York's most loved public spaces, and place of, you know, the highest real estate of New York these days. I mean, it's sort of crazy. We didn't, you know, it's very. So we start to think about, well, what does it mean to be, what's the measure of success for an architectural catalyst? Can it fall victim to its own success? And what's the responsibility of the architect in shaping the unpredictable aftermath of their own work? And these kinds of questions keep stirring in my mind. I like to, and as we were thinking about these questions, these kind of broad questions, we also started to think about the Highline as a platform for self-reflection about its precarious state of equilibrium between vacancy. This is when we were, a couple of years ago, I have to say, when we started to think about the project I'm going to show you, between this vacancy and gentrification that was to come. And I just wanted to play this one little video, if... So this is from the Sunken Overlook, and I like to think of this as like this is one of the most interesting places on the Highline. Highline is a place that you can't do a whole lot except walk and sit, and here you just kind of can't walk, but you just sit and you can watch traffic and and it's mesmerizing and it's defamiliarizing something that's very kind of normal and just present. And that's one of the things that the Highline succeeds in doing. I'm going to stop this for a moment. So we decided, we started to imagine the Highline as a platform, like literally as a stage for something new. And as we continue to work on it, well, also, how can we use it in a very, very different way? How could we be the users? How could we invent a kind of new program that was unforeseen? And so we started to imagine this urban scale performance in which the protagonist of the work would be the city itself. And this would be an opera, because we're very interested in rethinking opera as a form. And the operatic theme would be the unprecedented change of the city and the rhythms of its inhabitants. So the aligned and misaligned rhythms of the inhabitants. Also the winners and the losers. It would capture this work, ultimately would capture a particular form of contemporary anxiety unique to the Highline, filled both with a nostalgia for an irretrievable past and apprehension about a potentially alienating future. And it would be shaped by a sense of optimism characterized by the diversity of the city. I want to say, I remember pitching this to Robert and Josh, and they both really liked it. And then Robert left, and then Josh was nurturing it, and then Josh left, and Robert came back, and then it was just really very interesting history. But these guys heard about, and they just said, wow, that sounds really good, but it was so ambitious and weird, and nobody could really sort of understand what it would be. But what we wanted to do was a 1.5 mile long stage and use the entire Highline. So fast forward. The piece is called The Mile-Long Opera, a biography of 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock is very important. It's the time the performance starts each night and the hour of sunset, when people go from one activity to the next. It's a time of day associated with stability and family. But maybe very few of today's urban inhabitants really experience 7 o'clock that way. But it's this universal theme that allows us to touch on the changes, the unprecedented speed of change of the city, and especially around the Highline. So it took many years to nurture this piece, and DSNR created it and directed the work. It was produced by DSNR and Friends of the Highline and The Office, and the city played a very large role in it. David Lang was the composer, Ann Carson and Claudia Rankin, the two fabulous poets, wrote the text, and the text was inspired by accounts of everyday New Yorkers about the dramas of everyday life. So the Mile-Long Opera was performed by, as Robert mentioned, 1,000 singers from New York, 38 choirs. These are avocational choirs, they're church choirs, school choirs, community choirs. And this was, for 6 nights in October, this was performed. It was free to the public, and it was the culmination of a years-long community engagement project, which the Highline was actively involved in as well. So the singers were distributed along this mile-and-a-half long stretch, and the audience walked from the southern tip to the northern tip, each at their own pace. Some took an hour, some took 3 hours, and walked in and out of fields of singers, and leaning in very close to hear individual voices, sometimes clouds of voices. I'm going to play a little bit of it.
The moment just before night, civil twilight, the sun 6 degrees below the horizon. Grocery store around here anymore. No place to get your shoes fixed.
These singers were underfoot.
The river, shoe the clock, foam the dust, pour the bleach, towel the river. Want what they want, but they want you not to have it. Ponds, brooks, sharks, rush hour. The thing about the city, there's a level of anger. Money, how money.
It's a little product placement here.
Everything. Money, how money changes nothing. Whatever can happen to a city can happen to this city. Whatever
So this, when I look at it, I feel very sentimental because we were able to sort of produce a sense of citizenship there. It was the week of the Kavanaugh hearings, and there was something very, very special that happened between the singers, the eye contact, the audience that was moving, and very, very intimate. Just in closing, I want to say that the Highline, as a piece of infrastructure, transformed from this industrial ruin to a public park, a beloved public park. And for us, last month, from a park to an urban stage. And I have this great hope, and with the leadership of Robert going forward, that it can continue to be this living infrastructure for Projects Unknown. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful sets of presentations. And I know we're not going to have questions here because we're going to move out and there's a reception and you'll get a chance to mingle with all the great artists and designers that are involved in this project and see the exhibition. But before we close, I do want to give an opportunity to the other members of the jury. Charles, Jeanette, Paula, would you like to say a few words? No. Charles, Charles, you want to say a few words, and then we'll. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Diane. I know you want to go see the exhibit, and I won't stand in your way. I wanted to say just a word or two about the context of this award in this school, after all that's been said on behalf of the project and the team that's here. If you're giving an award for realized work at the urban scale, in some ways it will, by definition, not be the thing which is innovative at this moment in design culture, but at the same moment, it has to be received in the context of the evolution of each of these fields. It's also true that over the course of the past decade, this prize has been given 2, 3, 4 times. And somehow, in spite of the success globally of this extraordinary project, it had not yet been recognized. And so in that regard, our choice, I think, was relatively self-evident, if not simple, and came after months and months of a lot of due diligence looking really around the world. One of the things that we came down to as a jury was the sense that for this design school and the disciplines represented here, we were unaware of any realized urban project over the course of the last decade in which every discipline in this building was both reflected and challenged. And a part of that success, I think a part of the success you see this evening, is that each of those individual disciplines were operating at their highest level in the world, and in a moment, well outside of their lanes. The landscape architect leading a large urban team through the level of shop drawings to realize craft, the architect commissioning opera and video and staging curatorial practice, the community members coming out to resist the city's plan for demolition, come philanthropists, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's that combination, that rare combination, the tension within the design team, the origin story of the project emerging out of a tradition of resistance to the city's better plans. For all of those reasons, this is coming just far too late for me. Thank you.
Yes. So let's all go out and enjoy the reception. And thanks again to everybody who's come to make this such a nice event.